Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the Nvidia GTX 1660, a $200 6GB graphics card from 2019. We tested it with a handful of games in the last video, but today we're putting it to the test once again as it's the minimum suggested GPU for the newly released Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, a remake of the brilliant 2013 Pirate Adventure. Of course, this card can run the original version of the game at the highest settings with 60 FPS. This game is capped at 60 frames per second by default because the physics are tied directly to the frame rate. It's very smooth most of the time on this card. But what about the remake? Now Ubisoft state that this card, along with the RX 5500 XT or ARC A580, should be good for 1080p 30 FPS with the low visual preset, standard software-based ray tracing mode and balanced upscaling. But what's the reality? How accurate is this minimum GPU suggestion? I've got the 1660 paired with an i5-12400F and 16GB of 3000MHz dual channel DDR4 running Windows 11. This is my fairly modern yet modest test setup. The first thing I did was run the in-game benchmark to determine which upscaling mode performed best. The PC spec sheet doesn't specify. Now this remake is certainly far more demanding than the original, but it does seem to run better than what is suggested. We're exceeding 30 frames per second here. With the 1660 we can use FSR, XeSS or TAA, and I found that all three, with the balanced upscale mode enabled, performed quite similar to each other. FSR looked the sharpest however, so I think we'll stick with that. I included a native 1080p test, but the 1660 struggled to maintain 30 frames per second. That said, I switched to native mode to give the ray tracing modes a quick test, as I was curious to see how much this impacted performance and if it was better to just switch it off completely, despite the noticeable difference to the lighting. We have standard and enhanced RT modes here, which we can utilise with the 1660, so I'm assuming the lighting is just handled on a software level with a pre-RTX card. There isn't a huge performance difference between off and standard, but extended mode just kills the frame rate completely, so stay away from that if you have a more budget-friendly GPU like this one. As we move on to the gameplay, let's stick to Ubisoft's suggested minimum spec preset, the low graphics mode with the balanced upscaling and standard RT option. Especially now we know that FSR mode looks the best and runs just as well as the other settings, and the RT lighting doesn't have an extreme impact on this card's performance when set to standard. We'll start off with some gameplay at sea and then with the opening island, which I think looks really good, even with these settings. The gameplay changes are immediately noticeable, and I'm glad to see they've removed the terrible first-person modern-day segments. Personal preference, of course, fair enough if you enjoyed them. Black Flag is one of my favourite games, anything pirate related and I'm in. I'd also suggest playing Uncharted 4 if you like pirate themes, which we've covered on the channel in the past. Anyway, let's focus on Resynced here. Our minimum spec GPU is exceeding the stated 30 FPS experience and we're averaging 48. It feels fairly consistent to play, though there are perhaps a couple of performance hiccups, infrequent little stutters here and there, which are noticeable but not completely off-putting. It's something I saw occasionally in the original game too, and it's something I noticed when playing the original on modern hardware. With these settings we're looking at between 40 and 60 frames per second most of the time in the remake, which, to be fair, is better than what is stated, though I'm not using the minimum suggested CPU today. That said, it seems as though this game is far more GPU intensive, so even with an 8700K or Ryzen 3600, you'd probably find that the 1660 would still be the limitation, thus producing similar performance results. Unlike the original game, this will also go above 60 FPS, though on this card, as you can imagine, it's quite rare, at least on land. The upper end of the performance spectrum will be achieved sailing the high seas, and it may be tempting to turn the upscaling preset up or off, and perhaps increase the graphics settings, but there's too much variation between sea and land segments to guarantee a constant plus 30 frames per second. These settings do seem like a solid middle ground though. Performance is very smooth at sea, yet when we dock and explore a tropical island or busy town, there's still enough headroom to maintain that plus 30 FPS target by a decent margin, at least from what I've experienced in my couple of hours of gameplay so far. Speaking of which, let's talk about Havana. This is the first town or city that you're going to come across in this game, and it doesn't take as long to get there because of the removed modern day segments here, which is nice. The performance here was more all over the place. There's a lot of variation that depends on where you are. I was getting over 50 FPS at one point, yet sprinting down a back alley to escape a few enemies caused the frame rate to drop to the low 40s. Another example of why these settings suit the card. I've yet to test any other hardware, so I'm not sure how it runs on top-end CPUs and GPUs, but I imagine it could be quite demanding with the higher presets, especially if you enable the extended ray tracing option, and you're gaming at a higher resolution. Now, out of the 3 suggested cards, I wanted to test the 1660 as it has the least VRAM, just 6GB. Plus here in the UK, it was the cheapest out of the 3, including the 5500 XT and the A580. It's nice to see that the 1660 can handle yet another modern game, albeit with some sacrifices. This is something we spoke about in the last video, where I noted that we'd probably start to have to make more of these visual sacrifices as time went on. But it's to be expected with an aging card like this, of course. But what about 60 frames per second? Now sure, this card can handle at least 30, 40 in fact most of the time, with the suggested minimum graphics options, but can the 1660 here do 60 FPS in Black Flag Resynced? Well, it depends on how much of a sacrifice you're willing to accept, and if you want to drop things any lower than what we're already using. Dropping the preset to very low, turning RT or ray tracing off completely, and keeping FSR set to balanced will get a 60 FPS some of the time, at least in Havana here, though there will still be drops below this. It's not consistent. Now of course we can drop the upscaling down to performance mode, but this looks very soft, very blurry, and while it does give us an extra 5 to 10 frames per second, perhaps a little more in some cases, I'm not sure it's worth the visual degradation. It is up to you though, that's the beauty of PC gaming. After all, you can do what you like with the settings to try and achieve the performance that you desire as well. Now I'll probably stick to the settings we started with, but the main thing here is that this game will run, and in my opinion it is playable on the minimum suggested GPU, so I don't think Ubisoft have done a bad job at all of stating the minimum card. I think they're pretty accurate, and perhaps they could have stated something perhaps a little weaker as well, as we're certainly seeing well over 30 frames per second with the 1660. Now of course sacrifices to the native resolution is something I'd expect with more budget friendly cards like this these days, as well as lower visual presets, but I think this game still looks pretty good. It's a shame we didn't get the story DLC here, as that was actually pretty good from what I remember, but yeah, there we go. Let me know what you think of the performance and the game itself. Thank you as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.